Hello and welcome to the Automotive Anecdotes podcast from Automotive Tales, your regular chat about all things on four wheels that your other friends just don't want to talk about. And once again, you are of course joined by your regular hosts.
John, at JohnMSM on all social media platforms.
And I'm Martin, at Bob Clayton on Instagram. I haven't yet found my MySpace login. And of course, for Series 1, we have been joined by our regular guests. We have
Greg, the Yorkshire Engineer on Twitter. Still haven't made it to other social media channels.
Chris, at _Chris Norton _ on Instagram.
On the gram, because
The
we're
gram.
down with the kids.
And this is episode 4 of Automotive Anecdotes in Series 1, so I really hope you've been enjoying it so far. Thank you everybody who has voted on Barge Bingo. We will of course have another one at the end of today's episode. But before we start, we always get the listeners up to speed on what type of car bores we are with a simple question. Now, for the first 3 episodes, we've asked about the guest's own cars. So we've asked about first cars, worst cars, and regretted sales. So what if we expand that now to the family? Now, ideally parents, but maybe there's some other people in the family as well. But
Siblings, grandparents.
so yeah, what would you say is the best car that's actually, shall I expand it to that? What's the best car that's been in your family that wasn't owned by you? Maybe that's a good way of sort of putting it there.
Influenced you as a petrol head, as a car bore.
Yes, of course, this is going to be a tough one for me, bearing in mind if we say family, and I mentioned a couple of episodes ago that my grandparents specialised in Moscoviches and larders. So I'm not going to be much of a help here. So with that in mind, I'm going to pass it over. John, what about you? What's the best car that you've seen?
Well, I've been quite lucky, I think, in my upbringing. My parents seem to have... Well, there's definitely a petrol head theme. My mum particularly had some pretty awesome cars. Unfortunately, too young for me to remember. So she had a Porsche 924, which she bought with her own money. She started her own company and she was a bit of an entrepreneur. And she actually went into the Porsche dealership and kind of chose the car she wanted. And the salesman looked at my father and said, so how would you like to pay for the car? My dad looked back at him and said, yeah, my bloody car, she's paying, it's hers. And the salesman was quite taken aback. He'd never had a woman come into the Porsche dealership to buy her own Porsche before.
Brilliant.
I think it's quite cool.
And what was it you liked about the Volkswagen 924? Sorry, the Porsche 924.
Just, it was a cool car. Mainly the story about the fact my mum bought her own.
Yeah.
She did before that. My dad had bought her a car. He'd bought her a Mazda RX-7, the very first generation.
Oh, cool.
Unfortunately, I'm too young to remember it, but that was a very cool car.
I would buy Doritos.
Yes.
I would buy Doritos.
How about Doritos indeed? My dad hated it because
Really?
it went through so much oil and it drove him mad. Every time you filled it up, you had to put a quart of oil in it. And I think after its first rotor went, he basically handed it back, and that's when I think they went to look at the 94. My mum also, ironically, had a Mercedes 190E, which I think we talked about in episode 3, when we talked about cars we regret selling. I bought my gold, my champagne beige, whatever you should call it, 190E. I took it home one time from university, parked in the driveway, and my mum went, I'm sure that's my old car. And we couldn't work out whether it was or not, but the spec and the colour, everything was identical to the car she had when they were new. So she's had some pretty cool stuff. My dad's had all sorts of interesting stuff. He had an original XJS when they were new. But I think... So... I'm gonna go with one for each because my parents aren't together anymore, so I think that gives me the choice. It's like having 2 Christmases. I think probably the best car my mum has had or does have is a current. She's got a Fiat 124, the new Spider, which I think is a wonderful car. I really, really love it. Nice car to drive. It's not the Abarth, but there's still the 1.4 turbo you get in the standard 124 is lovely. And my dad's a bit more old school. His current car, though, sadly, he's quite unwell, so he doesn't really drive it anymore. But he has a 90s Bentley Turbo R, which is a monster. It's Blenheim Palace with a rocket ship up there, a rocket motor in it. I mean, the turbo is like the size of a dustbin lid. It's great.
Brilliant.
Unless, you need to put fuel in it.
Well, yes. Absolutely.
Yeah, and obviously, we mentioned in a previous video, actually, my dad had an 850 T5. That was quite influential on me as a car person, but the Turbo R is just so cool that's probably the best.
So bearing in mind, obviously, the Bentley, we've probably got a 6 and 3/4 V8.
6 and 3/4 V8 with the turbo.
Do you think that at some point you may go down the path of buying a car with a 6 and 3/4? Oh, hang on a minute! Right, now we see some trends
influential
coming
cars.
along. Yeah, absolutely. So.
Yeah. What we don't talk about is driving the Bentley.
No, it's it how's its reliability record?
I mean, well, my dad's driven it. It's been fine.
Okay.
Moving swiftly on.
We'll end it there. Greg, family-wise, any interesting cars in the family?
Not massively. Interestingly, when you look across all the cars, my dad's generally had company cars, so that hasn't made any real difference. He's had the typical Astra van, fastest van on the road type thing.
Is it white by any chance?
It was white. They were all white. Were all his vans, and he had a string of 20 years, bar a Ford Escort van interjecting in the middle. They were all Astras through and through. Interestingly, he started on 2-litre diesels and ended on 1.3-litre diesels at the end, so engines getting smaller, van getting heavier. In terms of interesting cars, probably my older brother's the only one who's had some interesting cars. He had an original Focus RS, which he regrets selling. That is definitely the car he regrets selling. But the one that I would say was the absolute weapon, and as much as I have a little bit, not necessarily a thing against VAG, but I'm not necessarily a fan of some of their design pieces, is the RS4 he had. He had the 4.2 V8 RS4, had that out while he was based in Germany. So there was certainly some times where it went for a few races on the Autobahn, went for a play on the Autobahn. Along with my Octavia VRS, I hasten to say that I have discussed previous episodes. Both cars have been down the Autobahn well into 3 figures.
I'm going to guess the RS4 was a little bit quicker.
Yeah, the RS4 is a little bit quicker. That was, you take my hat off, that was a proper piece of engineering, proper weapon of a car to sort of admire, look at and go, yeah.
I think there's very few poor RS cars out there, let's be honest. They're all pretty good.
I remember that one particularly, though, getting raved about at the time, just when it came out. Has there really been as good an RS since? That's probably a different debate.
Got a lot more power and things, but yeah, it was a bit more of a visceral car, from what I understand.
Yeah, I think when you talk to a lot of people will rave about the latest turbo engines in the RS4, and you know what, there is a generation for that engine. It is a very good engine. It works very well with the DSG, but if you go back to a car with a manual box and just a very, very, very good V8 engine, just as a block on its own right, that 4.2 V8 was very, very good, very characterful, lovely to drive. And even now, my brother, who has driven the latest RS4 and RS6s, said he would go back to that V8. Brilliant. Particularly because you can now supercharge it and get over 1,000 brake horsepower as well. In terms of just parents in general, I think the car that I pick out my mum's, probably on my mum's side, she had one of the very first Volvo 440s out of the block, one of the first ones in Huddersfield when they came out.
Very cool.
It's quite
the claim to fame.
It's quite revolutionary. Was that car in Huddersfield at the time? Was the 440, and compared to the 360 that we had before it, quite a step forward.
There we go. Well, happy days. So there's so far actually in terms of. I suppose we've got a 4-cylinder and two V8s then so far under the categories. If we've got the Bentley, the Audi, and the Fiat.
I kind of discounted the RX-7 because it was I was too young to remember it.
Yeah,
but I mean that's no cylinders. Just one Dorito.
So, Chris, are you going to keep the 8-cylinder trend going, or are we going down the cylinder spectrum?
I would love to say that yes, I can keep that going, but no, unfortunately. I have been sat here this whole time racking my brains for something vaguely interesting to talk about in terms of my family's cars. I struggled a lot. I think there's a lot of... I mean, I don't want to be too rude about the country itself, but French cars, lots of Citroens and Peugeots and things like that. Absolutely nothing that would inspire a young boy into the world of cars. I mean, really my influence in cars probably comes from my granddad. He was a mechanic back in the day, and we used to go kind of play around in the old cars that were in the garage. So Nothing really interesting owned by a family, I don't think. Probably the only ones really are kind of, my granddad had an old Series 3 Land Rover, and then he had 2 Suzuki SJs, of which I own one now. So that kind of, I found those interesting.
Yeah.
But there was certainly nothing even halfway aspirational, I suppose, about most of the cars that my family had. Yeah.
So I guess you never go into any of the French performance cars, because even you look back now, you look at some of the Peugeot 406 and the Xantias, which could have easily come with the V6 engines, and you saw some of that in like Ronin.
The BX GTI 4x4, that was great.
Yeah, and the XM, which had that V6 was quite, that French V6 was quite popular for quite a long time.
Yeah.
Wasn't it Maserati derived?
I can't remember the origins of it, but it certainly lived on in Peugeot, and Citroen both had V6s in their various models.
So we're right through to the end of the
sadly, nothing more interesting than diesel Peugeots and Citroens.
Well, I'm glad you said the Series 3 and the SJ, because I was genuinely worried that we were going to have our first pass of the series.
That's
as near as we're going to get.
Nothing noteworthy.
No.
Interesting.
Well, I think, in fairness, I'm going to be nearly in the same boat there, because I think I've already mentioned the fact that my grandparents had a fleet of lagers. They had a pint of lager. They had a fleet of lagers, Moscoviches. I then thought about my grandparents on the other side, and he had a fleet of Yugos, and then his last car before he died was a Daewoo Nexia, which was essentially an old Astra. Yeah, I always remember that for being one of the most modern cars I can remember that had 2 keys. You had to put key number 1 in for the immobiliser, then you had 10 seconds to start it with another key into the same ignition barrel. Work that one out. I
have never seen that.
No, it was bizarre, and that was on a Daewoo, as though people were going, I'm going to rob that Daewoo.
Okay, clarify. Is it Daewoo or Daewoo?
I always say Daewoo because I think it's more suiting to the rubbishness of the car.
I just love to go in my Daewoo.
That's the only reason why it's probably Daewoo.
Or the sound of somebody vaguely interested go, Daewoo? They to the pub.
They don't exist. They were
as a company,
they were rebranded in the Motor Trade as Chevrolet in Europe. And became
the Matiz and stuff like that.
Yeah, exactly. But but I think about my parents as well. So my mum has had a fleet of Nissans, which have all been as boring as each other. She had a mouldy brown Mini as her first car, had a Nissan Micra, and then had 2 Nissan Almiras.
Wow!
Which are all
so after one, she went back for more.
She went back and got another one straight back to the main dealer. And annoyingly, their most interesting car in the whole time I've known them, and I've known them since I was born, believe it or not. My mum. They've now got an Astra, and the most modern Astras. In fairness, though, it's got the 1.6 turbo in it. It's 200 brake. It does 0 to 60 in 6.6.
You know you don't work for a Vauxhall dealer anymore. You don't have to
I sold them the car. It's, no, but other than that, I think,
bastard.
No, I'm sorry. The only interesting car I can think of, which ironically has already been spoken about, but I actually did have a thing for my grandmother had a Citroen BX, and I'm only saying that because I remember as a kid the air suspension, the fact the car raised. It was a petrol, but it wasn't a GTI, but it was a petrol white BX, and it was a 1990 on an 8-Treg.
Yeah. Were they all white? Every BX I've ever had any encounter has always been white.
They look the best in white. Yeah. There were some grey ones. I remember seeing a few grey ones, but some darker coloured ones.
Red.
Yeah.
A couple of red ones.
I've never seen a red one.
Yeah.
But
it's very wedgy. I wonder whether it would suit the red.
I
think it does, yeah.
I have the thing for French diesels at that time, though, just because I think that they right up until that, I hate to go back to that 300 quid 406 I found a couple of episodes ago.
Great car.
But they all sounded so bomb-proof, and like when they started up in the cold, they just sounded like they were farting. It was great. It's the boy humour in me.
To be fair, my brother had a Mark 1 Renault Clio with, I think it was a 1.9 diesel in. And he used to get like 60 miles a gallon out of that thing. Just old school, naturally aspirated diesel, pretty much nothing to go wrong with it. It just 60 miles per gallon, however you drove it.
Yeah, absolutely. It was a different time back then. No turbos involved.
The French definitely mastered those sort of small cars with a fairly decent sized diesel, turbo or otherwise.
Yeah.
The BX is definitely cool. One of my favourite things is changing the wheel on a BX. Is that you don't need a jack, so you lift the car up on a suspension. They put a stand underneath. You pull the lever in the cabin, it just lifts the wheel off the ground, and off comes the wheel.
But
so they have a stand, but not a jack.
That's cool.
I remember my mum always tells the story of watching my rather large aunt get into the back of my grandmother's Citroen BX and then starting the car and seeing which one would win, the large arms or the air suspension. And apparently in those days, I think they creaked a little bit on their way up as the car worked out how to balance itself.
But interestingly, they're hydraulic, I think, instead of air.
Yes, they are.
Somehow,
it's actually the same system that Rolls-Royce used. Rolls-Royce licensed it from Citroen. Mercedes did a similar kind of thing in the same era, but they actually designed their own system. But yeah, Rolls-Royce actually had the system of Citroen because it was so effective.
I mean, the last Citroen to probably use it was the C6, I think. Or maybe C5s. I don't know if the C5s had it as well. But
the Xantia and so it probably was the C6.
The C6 with the 2.7
that's one of
diesel
those funny curved rear window. That was an awesome cool car.
I remember probably about a year or two ago actually looking at those again on Auto Trade. They've kind of aged okay, actually. I sort of come to it from like a kind of new angle of appreciation.
It was a bit like bangle cars in the BMW era. It's at first, like, well, what are you doing? But they've
got the opposite because they still look shit now.
Yeah, but ironically, the bangle ones now look really good in comparison to the new BMWs. I think. Anyway,
I nearly bought a C6, but apparently the engine management systems in them, when they break, basically require another C6 to fix them. So that sort of put me off because they had the 2.7 diesel that Jag were using right up into the end of the XF. They were using the 2.7 at the beginning of the XF production. It was a decent V6 diesel, but anyway, I digress. So we've got that, and I've just added a 4-cylinder in as well. So that's ended quite badly.
I have one more funny story about a BX.
Go on.
My grandfather, hopefully won't ever listen to this podcast because I don't think he listens to podcasts. But he did an amazing thing with the BX. He lives in Wales, and their driveway is the steepest thing. Not quite as steep as Tim's, who's a friend of ours, but a very, very steep driveway. And this is how we learnt how the air suspension and brake system marry in together. He decided one day he needed to move the car off the driveway to get his motorbike out. So he got into the Citroen and he thought, I'll just take the handbrake off and I'll down we go. I'll control it on the foot brakes. I think the handbrake is on the gearbox, so you can't just pull the handbrake up and do a handbrake turn in a BX because you rip the gearbox to pieces. So he thought, I'll use the foot brake. So he took the handbrake off. But of course, when the car's off and there's no height in the suspension, there's no braking efficiency. The idea being, the more weight you put in when the engine's running, the more pressure is in the system, therefore the more braking you've got. It's a very clever system, except when you've not turned the engine on. And because he thought he was just going to push it down and use a bit of foot pedal to get it down the driveway and pull it out on the road, he hadn't even thought to bring the keys with him. So as he got down to the bottom of the driveway, he thought, well, I can turn onto the road and just run it up the hill and run it out, and as soon as it stops, put the handbrake on. Only for him to get to the bottom of the driveway, turn the steering wheel and click, the steering lock came on. It's the first car he'd had that had a built-in steering lock. And so he just careered straight across the road into the neighbour's wall, through the wall into the front garden. And to this day, you can still see where they had to rebuild the wall in the neighbour's garden. It's hilarious. When we found out my granddad had a car crash, we were all very, very upset and very concerned. We said, what happened? He said, well, he was in the car without the engine running and no keys. The sympathy's drying up a little bit.
Brilliant.
Amazing.
Well, at least he was okay from it.
Yes, he was. Luckily, he was fine.
Well, we better move swiftly on,
yes,
looking at the time. So today's subject could be an interesting one. We will try and keep it clean because I think some opinions are going to fly. We want to talk about overrated cars, and I think this is going to cause some interesting debate and conversation. So we'll have a chat about that, and then of course we've got our Barge Bingo as well.
It's the finale of the Barge Bingo.
Finale. So who would like to give an opinion, bearing in mind that it could be ripped apart, it could be agreed with? Anybody want to put their neck out on the line?
Go on, Greg. You're desperate to
winding up for the punch.
I'm going to throw something out here that is really controversial because it's one of the UK's most popular cars, or was for several years, and it is the BMW Free Series.
Ooh.
And the reason, and I'm not going to knock it, I'm going to put my cards on the table up front. As a car to drive, BMW drives well, performs well generally, most of their engines. It's definitely a driver's car. I can't knock that. But when you see the amount of people who are buying, it's the use of people going, oh, it's a fantastic car. You know, I bought this BMW Free Series Tourer Estate. What do you want to call it?
Standard E92, 320D.
320D, 318D. Usually with an M Sport badge on, even though he doesn't deserve them credentials. Hasn't got loads of kit on, but when you get inside it, as an estate car, it is terrible. It hasn't got the size. It's claustrophobic, and to be honest with you, they're all missing the optional extra of an indicator as well. So,
I actually agree with you, because my brother had and his previous partner had an E92 320D touring. And they want to pick us up from the airport in Austria. They'd gone out before us, and there was 4 of us to get in the car. So 1 passenger in front, 3 in the back. It's the most uncomfortable car. It's really only a 4-seater, because the way the seats are set up, if you try and sit a person in the middle, it's just horrible.
And this is my point. You know, you're going, oh, it's a brilliant estate. It's not, though. It really isn't. If you want to get a BMW estate that has actually got enough decent sized boot, decent space to it, you need to be going for the 5 Series. The 3 Series is bought, I hate to say it, I know I'm casting stones here, it's been bought as a status symbol because somebody doesn't want to buy a Mondeo.
You know what? It's funny you say that, though, because you just said the 5 Series there. As an estate, possibly. As a saloon, still stupidly cramped in the rear.
Yeah, estate for the 5 Series. Definitely a 5 Series estate. And even then, that's only getting it on par to something that is actually usable as an estate.
Can they blame the rear-wheel drive aspect for the rear seat room? Or I know they did when the 1 Series came out, but it's...
Yeah, they're incredibly cramped inside.
Because there's too much happening in the back, that's why.
Yeah. Quite possibly. I know, interesting, coming back to the story of my brother in the E92, they actually bought that to go and do a season in Austria. They got a job out there driving a ski bus and doing bits and pieces. And... they bought this BMW to go out there, and on their first trip out to move essentials into the apartment, they tried to load the bed and mattress in and realised it wouldn't fit, so they borrowed my 1996 Volvo 850 instead. Literally, the drop of a hat the night before they were going. They said, we can't get everything in the car, can we borrow the Volvo? And I just gave them the kit, no problems, and it drove them all the way to Austria in the snow. They unloaded everything and drove all the way back with no problems whatsoever. So this brand new, well not brand new, it was from the auctions, it was probably about 7 or 8 year old one with pretty high mileage, but it was just useless. It just wasn't big enough inside. It failed its first objective.
It fails the first fundamental test, and that's what frustrates me about it. And people go, oh, it's brilliant, It isn't. It's not usable.
Okay, I've got an opinion that's reasonably similar, but it's quite broad. My overrated car brand is any Volkswagen. I have no time for Volkswagen.
Volkswagen or VAG as a group?
Volkswagens, because I don't understand why anybody would go and buy a Volkswagen when there is a more interesting Skoda or Seat available for less money. I think particularly when, so take for example the Passat, right back in the 90s, the end of the 90s, Volkswagen made a Passat, and then Skoda went and made it better by literally stretching the back, putting umbrellas in the doors and giving you a torch in the boot and calling it the Superb. And they've been doing it ever since. The Superb is a more interesting car than the Passat. The Octavia, especially the newer models,
more premium car these days,
but still cheaper. They're still cheaper than a list price Golf even.
And the Skoda that's just replaced the Golf.
Yeah, this is my point. My aunt, and I rib her for it all the time. Back in 2017, she went out and test drove all of these cars. She said, right, I've got a clean canvas here. She was getting rid of an A3 convertible. They'd just sold their doctor's surgery. She could have whatever she wanted. As a new car, she was going to treat herself. I'm going to buy myself a nice car that can fit the 2 grandchildren in the back. Great. She ended up with a brand new Golf, 1.4 DSG match, and it cost £38,000.
What?
Yes.
Oh.
So why the heck?
They saw her coming.
Well, they probably did. It was Norfolk as well, so you know. It's but my point is that you know, I'm not against the VAG group as a whole, because I really enjoyed my time driving the Skodas, and I still think things like even the Skoda Kodiaq. If I had to buy an SUV, I'd probably end up with a Kodiaq 7-seater. But it's the Volkswagen as a brand, I don't understand it anymore. Even when I went in, I used to car show with a guy who had a Sirocco, but he had a 1.4 supercharged turbocharged
TSI.
Yeah, and it was on its second engine. It was a 2010 model in 2015. It was a 5-year-old Sirocco. It just didn't. It did 30 something to the gallon. I don't get it. I just didn't get. I still don't understand Volkswagen. I just don't understand why you buy one. So my overrated car is actually a brand.
Having owned Volkswagens, I can kind of see a point. There's certain things I do like, but I think essentially the older things, I like the original Mark 1, Mark 2 Sirocco, the Corrada that followed it, and I loved my Mark 4 Golf. I'm not sure I'm sold on new ones.
Audi did all. I think what they failed to do is move everybody up. Skoda has moved up to where Volkswagen were. Volkswagen haven't, because Audi hasn't moved up. Volkswagen haven't moved up into Audi's space, and Audi gone up even higher, more premium. Because Audi's, and if you're going to buy a Volkswagen, most people go, I can afford the Audi.
Yeah.
Well, this is the thing. The Passat, to me, even growing up, the Passat was verging on being a 3 Series competitor or a 5 Series. Maybe not 5 Series, but it was an Audi and BMW competitor. Whereas if you couldn't afford a Passat, you'd buy a Mondeo or a Vectra at the time. So it's always sat in an odd, a Golf is always more than an Astra and a Focus. So I never understood why the Mark IV Golf, I do remember, as we sit in this studio, at the time, the people who lived next door to this studio had a red diesel 2001 Mark IV Golf. And I remember that being a really solid car and thinking, that's cool. But then when I actually got to a point where I could drive myself, and it was just like, well, the Skoda exists now. This was just, if you think back to sort of the early 2000s, Skoda had just launched the Fabia, and people were starting to take notice, and the jokes were starting to go away.
Yeah, I remember at school we used to make jokes about why does a Skoda come with a heated rear windscreen? To keep your hands warm while you're pushing.
Yeah. That's weird. So what I've just said there hasn't caused any debate in the grand scheme.
Yeah, I actually tend to. I do like a Golf. There's something ubiquitous about a Golf. You can go anywhere in it. You could take it to a fancy 5-star hotel. You've got a brand new golf park out front, or you can go into town, go to the pub, take it to the golf club, drive to the tip and use it for all sorts of things. But it doesn't really. It's not on my radar as a car.
I think, like you say, it's kind of alienated itself into something that's just irrelevant now. And actually, when you boil it down to how probably 90% of people buy cars, which is on finance. In terms of the monthly payments, I think Greg was saying that it's probably not that much more to have an Audi, and you might as well. So
it's lost. It hasn't got a USP anymore, has it?
Yeah, not really.
Even when you
unless it's Golf R, they're pretty cool.
I mean, my cousin had a Golf R, and it was fine, but it was still, there was a button that made the exhaust spit. That's all I can remember really from it. It's a simple case of even when you think about, I remember as a kid the VRSs, like Skoda brought out a diesel Fabia VRS, which was really cool. Like it just looked cool at the time.
Was that when they started the little lime green bit on the badge started to become quite popular?
Yeah, a lot of them were black. A lot of them were black VRSs with body kits, and they'd have the VRS.
They had the red calipers as well. So them 19 TDI 130s are actually becoming very popular now.
Yeah.
Or they're starting to appreciate in value if you can find one that hasn't
really good cars.
Hasn't been played with.
The engine's pretty bulletproof as well, isn't it?
But that was the same engine, like you say, at the time where you had the Golf, but I had a friend who we took, and he ended up buying a Leon, because you could buy the Leon Cooper and you could buy the FR with the 130 and the 150 engines respectively. Well, I think it's 150 in both of them actually. Yeah. Just difference between the Cooper and the FR, and you got the car looked different.
Well, you look at even like the next generation up from that, and it was like Skoda would sell you a Superb. And they'd sell you a Laurent and Clemin version if you wanted a Highline Passat, or they'd stick a Golf R32 engine into a Superb, and you get a 3.2 litre V6 4-wheel drive Superb.
Saying that, even today, you can buy on the market. You can buy the 2 litre the Golf GTI engine in the Superb.
Yeah, you get it as a 280 brake. Yeah,
4-wheel drive, and it's a
less money.
It's it's the one perfect one for a family man. 2.4 children, dog in the boot, and it'll still do GTI pace, or not there, far off.
Yeah, no, absolutely.
Okay, so we've We've demolished
We've killed
the Germans.
Volkswagen. So maybe we should feel a bit more. Is there anybody that would like to go and target a different country rather than Germany?
Yeah, I would actually. Yeah. So now that we've alienated a good amount of the listeners, I think we'll crack on to the British.
Finish the job off.
Yeah. So my overrated car is the Land Rover Defender. Not the new one, but the outgoing one that's already gone.
The golden one.
So, yeah, I've always kind of not quite got the Defender because it's one of those cars that has survived way longer than it really should have.
Mm-hmm.
It's completely uncomfortable. It's sold as a utility vehicle, but it's not cheap enough for anyone to afford to buy one as a utility vehicle. So even to the market of farmers and people like that, it doesn't quite make sense.
I'm half with you. So I think there's a reason for that. I think as a utility vehicle and a farmhand vehicle, I still think it's probably an underrated vehicle. But it's become cool. And so now you get it with bigger alloys with sort of more low-profile tyres, and it comes polished and clean. And that's killed it. It's made it too expensive because it's become a desirable item.
But it's missed the point. I think what it's failed to do, as you said, it's been around too long, it's failed to move on, is, 50 years ago, 40 years ago, when you were in Old Ills at Yorkshire and you were trying to drag your sheep out in the middle of... Brilliant. But then you went to the local pub, you went to the local shop, and you didn't travel very far at the time, and actually getting in your Sunday best and going out, you get on train or bus and go off to the local area.
Yeah.
People nowadays, which is why you see a lot of them driving your sort of Mitsubishi L200 Warriors, your Hiluxes, stuff like that, is because you know what, you could chuck sheepdog everything and do 90% of what you want to do.
Yeah.
But you could still jet wash it down, get in it and go do 200 miles across the country with your family, because...
And it'd be comfortable and your ears wouldn't be bleeding.
It's comfortable, come with leather, cruise control, heated seats. It'd come with a cabin which was fit to go out.
But all of that is because it's trying, towards the end of its life, it was trying to be something it's not. It was trying to be, or it had become a fashion statement.
It was a polished turd. In many ways.
And it was completely inept at being a fancy car. It didn't suit leather seats and air conditioning because there wasn't plenty of room in the cabin.
Is this where Mercedes actually got it right with the G Wagon? They saw where it was going and thought,
it's a better choice.
From that perspective, yes, because it was still quite an agricultural vehicle underneath, but it had the scope for turning it into a fancy car.
A Defender has to be basic. I've driven Defenders for the military. I've driven Defenders in Afghanistan. I've taken them over some quite rough terrain out there. And you know what? In basic form, where you just want something you know is going to get you there, brilliant. Absolutely brilliant piece of kit, outstanding, even if it did upset the American police at the time. That's another story. I just crawled through a ditch and up a hill just to avoid them.
There's definitely another video in that.
Definitely a story in that. But it was fantastic. It does a brilliant job there. But on UK roads, to do UK family life and what UK people want to, even what you'd say your traditional farmers, it's just not fit for purpose. It doesn't meet the brief anymore.
The sort of vehicle that suits that, as much as we hate SUVs, and I hate SUVs myself, the XC90 that I had, it actually is that kind of modern equivalent, because we proved during the festival that it's more than capable of mud plugging and dragging farm trailers around the field and pulling other vehicles out of the mud.
I mean, a good telling point there is one of the few farmers that we know personally has, I think it's something like 24 different farms that he farms between sort of here and Market Harbour and up into the Norfolk borders. His personal vehicle is an Isuzu.
Yeah.
I can't remember the name of that. The DMAX. Is it DMAX?
DMAX.
Yeah.
It's very similar to the L200 Mitsubishi. DMAX.
And his wife has an XC90.
And his wife has an XC90. And okay, fine. That his dad has a Discovery 4 still, but you think then even an Isuzu Trooper
astronomical mileage.
Yeah. But I was looking here. So here's a quiz for you. So a friend of ours, Chas T. Thorold from the Lincolnshire Fruit and Veg business, posted this up earlier in the week. So he'd found a nicely restored 1984. If effectively Defender, but obviously with a canvas bag.
Nicely restored is this. My problem is cleaned and polished.
Restored to original spec with a 300 TDI engine. It's now for sale. How much do you think that is going to cost you? as a essentially a
But
poverty spec.
between about probably about $7,000 or something
And the
ridiculous.
rest, I reckon you're probably pushing close to 20 grand, if not early 20s.
Really?
£29,500.
That's
That's
just
the
obscene.
It's a piece of farm machinery. It should
Yeah.
be in that 5, 6, 7,000 pounds. I mean, that's
Well, yeah.
been fully restored, so I'd expect to pay a little bit more because you
but
could
Yeah.
then use that back on the farm and get 10 years out of it.
Halve it for a 40-year-old battered Defender. You'd still be paying 15 grand.
Yeah.
Well,
It's ridiculous.
probably the cheapest kind of realm of Defenders you can buy is sort of 3-4 grand for just to get into that kind of scene, if you like.
Yeah.
But and people bang on about the off-road capabilities.
Yeah,
of
how
them.
many years? Sorry.
Yeah, well, I was going to say people bang on about the off-road capabilities of them, but there's actually cars out there that are just as capable for a fraction of the price.
Well, from the same company, I think the point that a lot of
You mean
people-
like a Suzuki Jimny venture?
Like a Jimny or
Jimny.
something like that.
But
Dirt cheap to buy, very capable. But yeah, somehow people go all misty-eyed over the past and on a Defender.
And it's bizarre because from the same company around the same time, even 15, 20 years ago, when you had some of the discoveries, and particularly the early discoveries that I think have become a bit overinflated now, but you look at some of the earlier discoveries, the Mark 1 to Mark 2, and even probably to your Mark 3, but probably Mark 2 particular.
Yeah.
That Mark 2 would do 90% probably of what the Defender would do.
Oh yeah.
That was what
still-
the Defender should have been, essentially.
That is what the Defender, in my eyes, should have become. It should have stopped there and gone, right, this is a discovery. It's big, it's comfortable, it'll pull your horse trailer, take the kids, the horses, running boards.
The Mark II seems to, Discovery that is, still seems to be having a bit of an identity crisis at the moment, because I think a lot of people still think of it as, because the 3 and 4, and obviously now what we're on, essentially the 5,
Yeah, and the sport
are
modes.
so radical, and JLR have gone completely in one direction. The 2 seems to struggle from this identity crisis that it still used Rover switchgear, and the same way the Mark 1 Freelander could be had with a 1.8 K series in it if you really wanted it.
You were brave.
I should know my uncle's had one go with multiple head gaskets, and he's now on his 4th Freelander, and he won't buy a Discovery Sport because he likes the Freelander.
I should say Discovery. What? Sorry.
Sports. But it's so you could buy a Discovery 2 for probably a quarter of the price of the same age Defender, and you're right, they'll do exactly the same thing, except a Discovery has probably got hill descent control, even in that generation, built into it. And, towing stability.
I drove one round at Honley's show for a weekend when back in the day when I was helping out the Honley's show, big agricultural farming show in Yorkshire, and I took one round with a big farm, 30-foot type trailer on the back, moving hay bales, bins, rubbish, you name it. I shifted it about, even down the muddy hills and stuff, and it just got on with it. Low box, high box, locked. It was brilliant, but it was comfortable.
Yeah.
I didn't rattle. It was comfortable to sit in. It was comfortable to drive. It had a decent radio that I could actually hear.
It does all the stuff that a Defender would, pretty much, and it does it well.
Without the price premium. That's
well. The other thing about Defenders now as well, that I'm just kind of being exhaustive, but the fact that they are just stolen every day. They must be the most stolen car in the UK these days.
it's the fact you can unbolt the doors.
Yeah, well, there was actually a news story that I read the other day about a Defender that got stolen. And they drove it to this nearest cornfield where the corn was up there. And they were stripping it, and they caught them red-handed stripping this Land Rover in the field at night.
And they left,
with a quite small
they left
budget
their getaway car, didn't they? Because I noticed that they left their getaway car because it was a Volkswagen and they'd forgotten what it looked like. So it was so dull and dreary.
It faded into the background.
Yeah.
So it's really interesting you've chosen that, because my most overrated car, I kind of went on a bit of a journey thinking about this. And I kind of wanted to jump on the bandwagon. Ferrari's overrated, silly cars. And for a very long time, that was actually my opinion, until I drove a Ferrari Mondial, and then within you get the older Ferraris with the gated chrome shift, and this has got quite a high revving V8 rear engine, transverse mounted, and it wasn't a polished garage queen. This is a car that's been used, and we were at Le Mans. It'd been driven down to Le Mans. And it was driven all the way back, and actually surprisingly flawlessly. And I got a bit misty-eyed, and I actually kind of fell in love with this car, and I understand the magic of an older Ferrari. So I went down that direction and came running all the way back, and I ended up in a very similar position to you, Chris. So I was going to potentially state Range Rover, because I'm going to lay my cards on the table. I love Land Rovers, I love Range Rovers. My dad's had loads of Range Rovers, and I love the P38 specifically. And I still want one, but it doesn't mean they're not actually quite terrible cars. The Range Rovers and the Discos are quite unreliable. In fact, I think I was out in the car with a father-in-law just last weekend, and we saw a Disco broken down at the side of the road with the AA. And just as I was about to say something, he went, "Oh, another dodgy Disco." And it's that reputation. They are terribly unreliable.
Are we talking more modern?
That was a Disco 4, I think.
Yeah.
So interestingly, I've got a story that quite closely aligns with that. So my great uncle, probably about I'd say about 10 years ago, he bought a full fat Range Rover, and he spent more time in the first kind of 8 months to a year of ownership driving the dealer's Discovery 3. In the end, he just said, I'll just keep the Discovery 3. Just give me the difference or whatever. And because it spent so much time in the dealership, he was like, actually, the Disco 3 fits all my needs and it works, so I'll have that.
Yeah, you don't need a new car for the sake of it.
I do wonder what will become of the modern Range Rover as we get into a more conscious world. You know, all those LA celebrities are switching to Teslas, which is a different conversation because they're overrated anyway. But it's interiors. Tesla interior. Anyway, so you wonder what will happen, because the Range Rover is popular now not because it's a great reliable car, it's a status symbol. Yeah. And it became a status symbol between all those people that wanted to get papped, you know, by the paparazzi.
Can we just bring some around? We talked about Rover in one of the previous episodes. I noticed that popular culture, rappers or musicians, seem to start referring to their status symbol as Range Rover as a Rover.
Yeah.
I can't remember what the song was. Somebody talked about in the backseats of my Rover. I listened to it. I thought, your Rover? Is this like 1990s
It's
council
the next
sales?
line when they say, they'll pull me closer in the back seat of your Rover that you can't afford. It's like, well, they're about 300 quid. You can pick up a 45.
Yeah, when I first heard that, it took me ages to realise they were talking about a Range Rover. It was really weird.
Who is financing a Rover that they can only just make the monthly payments on? Because sort of 300 quid outright. Oh, can you do a payment plan for £5 a month or something? It's like, I could only just afford that.
So I'm gonna kind of try and wrap this up a little bit with quite a controversial view. So you'd think the kind of Defender is overrated. I've kind of gone with Range Rover only because they're so unreliable and expensive to maintain that they'll start to disappear because they just won't be fixable. They won't be affordable.
It's not viable.
They just get scrapped because they're so complicated, and they generally the Mark IVs and onwards Discos are quite reliable. With I kind of follow up to that, and the thing I think is the most overrated car at the moment, and I'm going to go with the Ineos Grenadier, which I saw in the flesh yesterday, and I'm going to say it, and I don't think many people have said it in the media at the moment, but it's ugly. It is horrendous. It's like a fake, cheap copy of a Gucci bag. It looks like a Gucci from a mile away, and you see it, oh no, that's terrible. And you say, oh, it's a Defender. Oh, wait, no, what the frick's going on with the front and the windscreen?
It's like a Santana, if you remember those.
That is exactly what I was just
like
a picture of.
A Defender that have got. It's like someone's gone, can I copy your homework? I forgot to do this. Oh, yeah, but change it up a bit so it doesn't look like you copied me.
Absolutely.
And they've just gone, oh, well, we'll do... I mean, the headlights are quite iconic, so we'll do something different with those, and then... we'll just kind of smooth out some of the bits and pieces, and there we go. Submit that.
There's a few of those actually. I did some research a while ago on this. So the Santana, which was the Spanish version of Land Rover, which was still kind of a Land Rover, which was a bit of a facelift.
Yeah, it was sort of built under license, wasn't it?
Yeah. But there was other ones. There was one called a Landmaster. I'm going to reel things off. I'll try and find some pictures. The Landmaster, which was it was a bit like the Ineos type rip-off, trying to make a better Defender.
Google that.
One that I really like, the Simca or Matra Rancho.
They
actually looked like a precursor to the Disco.
Were they two-wheel drive though, I guess?
I don't think they came four-wheel drive, but they were quite good off-road. They were quite upright, narrow tyres.
Yeah, I think it's a real shame when you talk about it, because the problem is there are some really viable candidates out there, and we go back to the whole farm vehicles appeal and Defender's replacement. I know quite a few of them in Lincolnshire now who, we talk about Isuzu and that. You see Sangyon. But at least as much as some of them were a bit dubious in the design front in the beginning, they've tried their own way, and they're heading their own way, and they're heading in their own direction. And actually, I'm starting to hear more and more strong, positive things.
It was a bit like Great Wall did some 4x4s, didn't they?
Yeah,
Great
yeah.
Wall Steeds, and it was just they were 15 grand.
I'm going to guess it's a Chinese brand.
Yeah.
But
Yeah.
did Great Wall get sucked up into SsangYong or something?
I think they were somehow
possibly,
related. Was it SsangYong that always used to use Mercedes engines?
Or BMW, one of them.
Or
It was
something
older
like that.
generation.
And but because they were that older generation, much in the similar way of what Skoda have done, is effectively it's proven technology.
Yeah.
So
Yes.
Absolutely.
someone has done all the R&D, spent all the money getting it right, doing all the engineering, and then someone comes along and just buys that for X amount and puts it in their car, and
Accurate
it's
for
going to be
Renault.
pretty
Going back a
reliable.
few episodes, BMW units in Rovers.
Yeah.
It was the one bit that worked, and why they're still so much more expensive than petrol ones.
Hondas
Yeah.
in Rovers.
Hondas and Rovers as well.
Oh,
It's
yeah,
happened all through the decades.
We could do a whole episode on
Well, it's-
on cross pollination
I
between.
do feel
car
we need
brands.
an episode on cross pollination and also
Yeah.
underrated cars, because I feel we're probably criticising a lot of brands
Yeah.
here, but at the same time wanting to rave about others. John, I'm worried about time.
Yes, so should we get on to the finale of Barge
It's
Bingo?
thrilling. So, as you know, with Barge Bingo, for the last 3 episodes, we have each brought a car to the table based on some criteria that have been set by the judges.
For the sake of our significant others, we haven't bought any cars.
And no, they are all sold subject to the viewers' vote. No, that's a lie. So the final one, John, you set this one. It's quite an interesting one. Just to point out, obviously, next episode is the finale. The plan will be that we can then see who's got the most popular opinion after these 4 episodes and go from there.
So, if you're listening to this, that means we need you to get involved. So we want you to vote for which one of our Barge Bingo choices from the previous 3 episodes and from this episode you think is the best, and then we're going to toss up all the votes. And on the next episode, whoever got the most votes is going to win a prize.
Ooh, what's the prize?
The prize is a box of Yorkshire Gold.
Wow.
And it doesn't actually get any better than that.
Perfect. Well, there we go. It's all to play for, ladies and gentlemen.
Even though Chris only drinks coffee.
Yeah, can I forfeit?
You can have the.
I'll duck out of that.
You can have the Kenko substitute.
Oh, lovely.
So, John, what's the category for this?
So
week?
it was V8 sports cars for under £10,000. So you got £10,000.
Not just V8. Was it Vee Engined?
Vee Engined. Sorry,
So-
not V8. Yeah,
So
it
you
can
can
be a
have a
V10.
V4 if you want,
Yes,
if you
or a
can find one,
V6,
or a
V5.
V6.
Now, when we wrote this, there was a huge debate
We
about
had a long debate on
V5.
V5.
So
You get one when you buy the car, but
Yeah.
So, John, I don't think you've been first in any of these yet, but I may be wrong.
I'm happy to do this, but I fear I may have a bit of a mic drop.
Okay, right. You
I
can
think-
go.
I
You
think
can go.
last
You
then.
can go last.
Damn it.
Shall I go first? I'm happy to go
yeah,
first.
go first.
I've got 3.
As always.
One.
Okay, I'm going to go for 1 because I think this car didn't get the praise it should have had when it was new, and I like it. Not many others do. This is the last in the run of these. So this car is a 4-litre. It's
Good capacity.
It's a great capacity. It. You know what? I'm going to have to come back because I've just realised it's not a V. Sorry, I've just realised it's a straight 6. I'll tell you what I was going to pick then, just so you know, and then I'm going to go back.
What's a 4-litre straight 6?
It's a Jaguar XJS, which was the Celebration limited edition, was a 4-litre straight 6.
Well, if you can find with a V12, then you're on.
It's okay, because what I will do is I will revert straight to my second option, which also is a car that I think gets overlooked these days, is the Jaguar XK 4.2, but one of the early editions
amazed
of
you
that
can get them for
model.
under £10,000. I would have thought an XK8, but an XK.
That is an XK 4.2 with 11 documented services, registered on the 5th of April
That's where
2007.
you find it's older than 300,000 miles. It's not had enough
It's done 106, so it was serviced
Okay.
at 10, 19, 26, 35, 45, 57, 67, 76, 86, 93 and 95. All service work completed by either Jaguar main dealer or Jaguar specialist. Comes with a 12-month MOT and breakdown cover, which is probably quite
You will
useful.
need. Yeah,
And is £8,200.
that's good.
I do have an honourable mention, but I will wait till the end. But that
Okay.
was the one that, as a car if I was buying my own money, I'd love to own one of those just
Yeah.
to have a go in it. So I will save my honourable mention, but my car to the table. John's still looking smug, so I'm worried.
I think mine is potentially a little bit risky, and I've maybe stretched the description a little bit.
Right,
But
okay.
I think it's an incredible car for money.
Chris?
Yeah, I'll jump in there. So, right. So my car is a V8, 2-door, coupe, manual, 6-speed manual. In fact, 4 seats.
Good.
So it's got power steering, central locking, electric windows, mirrors,
Skin and wind.
dual zone climate control.
Is
Yeah,
it-
all that kind of good stuff.
Is it German?
No, it's not.
Okay.
So, and it's got 82,000 miles on it, and it is listed for £7,989.
Ooh, that's
So you're interested, aren't you?
I'm interested.
You guys are interested. It's 2006.
Okay.
And the next bit might give it away. I'll tell you what size engine it's got. It's got a 5.7 V8.
It's a Monaro, isn't it?
Correct, it's a Monaro.
Incredible.
There it
It's
is.
got 2 mentions
Yeah.
in 4
A
episodes.
Monaro for under 10 grand.
That's
Yeah, oh, they are, aren't they? Yeah.
If you look at it the other way, it's like, how old is it?
2006.
It's not even one of
So
the
it's a 14-year-old
originals.
Vauxhall that's still commanding
It's
Yeah.
a 14-year-old
8,000.
Holden, John.
Yeah. But I mean,
I instantly prefer that.
unfortunately, it is silver.
Yeah,
But yeah, these
This is
things can
quite
be
subtle, isn't it?
fixed.
is that an independent or a dealer? Sorry, is that an independent dealer or is that a private sale?
From I think it's a dealer. Yeah.
I've just seen the dealer and I instantly don't want it. If you've ever been to a certain dealer in Keighley, you'll know why.
Oh no!
Yeah.
Oh yes! We've got a car coming in next week for a new engine that came from there. A yellow
Be
T5R.
careful not to say the name because we don't want to libel.
No, don't
case.
need a label,
No.
but I just think
Not
if you
how.
see Keighley on any Auto Trader advert, avoid.
Yeah, there's just something about I don't know, something in the
About the
water.
area.
there. something in the water.
Yeah, the filters get
When
a
they
bit funny.
when they top
it's-
up the coolant, you see with this
Yeah.
this very
Yeah.
horrible water, it kills the cars.
Yeah,
Foams and-
yeah,
Um,
yeah.
Right, come on, Greg.
So, my car is 9999,
Right on the
Not in
right
the
on the
budget.
money.
1995,
Ooh,
It's quite a bit older.
5 litre.
Okay.
It's got to be a Jack.
No, it's not Jag. It's almondine red with cream leather.
so it's a Ferrari?
It isn't. It's got full massive service history throughout its life.
Is it an 8 Series?
No, it is a Mercedes-Benz.
That would be a very good choice, but I don't think you get
Yeah.
under 10 grand.
It's an SL500.
Ah.
Oh yes, yeah. That's,
Ooh.
Oh, a 90, yeah, the proper brutalist design.
Proper one.
Yeah.
Full
Yeah.
history on it.
Built like a brick shit house as well.
Twin cam or quad cam? Does it say?
It doesn't say.
Because that makes quite a big difference. The quad cab is much
But
nicer.
again, beautiful.
Quite rare.
It's only had a couple of owners. It's got full history, private plate, all the toys on it. Again, another proper weapon, bit of a sports car.
yeah, that's a
That's
car for
nice.
money.
Can I, just before you mic drop, can I throw in the honourable mention there then?
Go
Because
on.
my honourable mention was basically a sort of modern equivalent to Greg's there, although I think
Okay.
I do prefer Greg's. But a lot of people forget about the final CL.
Oh, the CL.
Oh, well, that isn't even the final
Yeah.
one. This was 2000, but it's a 5.5 litre V12.
Oh, it's the but they did a CL 600 as well, didn't they?
They did, but this is still a
But-
5.5 litre V12, which
My-
is just like...
That's nice.
And my honourable mention that I'd love to put here is actually, but you can't really class it as a sports car in some ways unless you drive it that way, is the Mercedes-Benz SEL 500
yeah.
Yeah.
from 1990.
There's a lot. So yeah, there's a lot of mistakes. Oh, now you see, I
Oh,
would have.
that's lovely. Yeah, that's very lovely.
It's
And my third option was a Nissan 350Z.
Oh, okay.
curveball. Okay.
350Z from 2004.
So
It's definitely a curveball.
I'll run through quickly. I have 3 down, but I think there's one of them is the pièce de resistance for me. So the 2 kind of backup options in case this one had been chosen.
Was it a purple Saab 93 V6?
No, it wasn't. Oh, the Saab was a 2 litre.
Darn it!
Porsche 928. I did find a Porsche in reasonable running,
Okay.
tax tested or whatever you call it. It's roadworthy Porsche 928 for under 10 grand, 8,495. It wasn't auto, it was an early one, not in a great spec, but still, it's a Porsche V8. That's pretty cool.
Yeah.
A definite honorary mention or honourable mention has to go for the Bentley Turbo R. You can pick up a Bentley Turbo R for sub 10 grand.
Is it a sports car or a cathedral?
Well, yeah, it's a sporty Blenheim Palace. Sports Palace.
Okay.
Because it's a fast car, but my mic drop comes in a very similar vein. So it's a 4-door, it's a saloon, it's a V8.
It's a Phaeton or something.
No, I think this is.
But it's a Bentley.
Continental.
Not
Flying Spur.
Continental.
Arnage. Oh, you're thinking of Mulsanne?
Yeah, Mulsanne.
No.
See what I did see.
This is even better. Go on, sorry.
It's not something like a 750 BMW.
No, even better. BMW E39 M5. And at first I found it and it was just over budget at £10,101. And then I noticed it had been relisted. No response to the person that had bid on it, never contacted the seller, and so it relisted, and it's now relisted at a buy it now of $8,999. Now this is an on the road car. It doesn't state it's got any faults of any major, just a few scuffs on the bodywork and things. Obviously, a sub 10 grand M5 has the potential to be very, very expensive.
Yeah,
but that's
that a
got to
sports
be.
car?
Well, this is where it's.
Just throwing that out there.
I mean, it's a very sporty car.
It
In
is
the
sporty.
same way a Range Rover Sport isn't really a sports car,
No,
but I reckon that's more sporty than most sports cars.
it's certainly got the grunt.
Yes. So are they 400, just over 400 horsepower, rear-wheel drive, limited slip diff, manual, 6-speed gearbox. It's got everything you need for a sports car, or
It
throw
does,
Madonna around in the
but
back if you've seen the BMW short films.
Yeah,
I'd still have the Monaro.
Really?
I still have the Monaro.
And the Monaro's good, but
but let's see what the viewers or the
M5.
listeners think of this.
if I get it onto piston heads, then the M5's going to win every time.
Yeah,
Absolutely. Well, I think that is a really good point to wrap
Wrap
up
up,
as we
absolutely.
hit the end of our 59-minute episode 4 special. Watch it now come in much shorter or longer than that.
by the time we chopped all the crap
Well,
out.
exactly. But have a look on the social media. Let us know what you think. Put your vote in. Next episode is the last one in the series, which we very sad for us, but we've had a really great time doing this first series. Have a look. Let us know what you think. Join us on Automotive Tales online and on social media.
And on YouTube.
And we will see you next week. Goodbye.
Thank you very much. Goodbye.
Bye, everyone.
Ta-da.